Hi everyone, my name is Annie Nguyen. I felt that I was in a place in my career where I could tell a compelling story and write a narrative for why I need a career development award at this point. So I decided to write something around getting training in cognitive health and how that relates to HIV. So the sort of story behind that is a couple of years ago, I participated in a program called the Sustained Training in Aging and HIV Research Program at ECSD through the HNRP there. And that was an NIMH funded program that was meant to develop scholars in the research area of HIV and aging, plus mental health and cognitive health. And cognitive health was not something I had ever focused on before in my career. So this was a new piece for me. And having gone through that program, I had the opportunity to write a couple of papers and get into some of the data sets that have these variables and that deal with cognitive health. And I thought that was a really interesting piece that I could incorporate into my research, but because I'd never had any formal training, I'm really not familiar with all of the different ways that different pieces of cognition is measured and how to use, some of these variables. So that was the narrative of my K, was that I am developing as a HIV and aging researcher, having had experience in the aging world, but now want to bring in this cognitive piece into my research. So the K was really involved research studies using secondary data sets from the HNRP and other places to look at health behaviors in older adults or people aging with HIV and how that relates to certain cognitive domains. But then the training piece was really around cognition. So there's a heavy piece on cognition and statistical training in order to advance some of my statistical skills as well. So it made sense to me to submit it to NIMH, given the topic area, given the fact that NIMH funded the STAR program and have funded a lot of the longitudinal studies that I was proposing to use in my research plan. So I went about looking for different mentors to sort of fill these different roles, and approached different folks and got together a team of mentors. And my primary mentor was really the one who helped me with my sort of initial submission. And what was really helpful for me was seeing a copy of his K award. So he had a K award in his several years ago in his portfolio. And for me, seeing the actual application, a funded application, and all the different components and how it all ties together, some of the language that used in it, that was really helpful for me in order to put my first application together. And he was pretty involved in that application, so he did see like every piece of it before we submitted it. And I also reached out to other mentors on my team as well to review different parts of it. So it was reviewed by many eyes before it went into the first submission. And we submitted it to NIMH. I submitted it to NIMH and was really excited about it, but it came back as not discussed. So it did not receive a score in study section. And so that piece is always disappointing, the working on this for months, and it's months leading up to the submission deadline. I'd say I started, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months prior to the submission deadline, maybe a little bit more than that. And it's always sort of a letdown to know that it was not even discussed. And so what I did was I turned off the computer and went and did something else, and then came back to it the next day, right? So and then just kind of went at it again. And it's that's just kind of, that's what we have to do. So with the resubmission, I started working on the resubmission, and there was some strategizing that I did with my mentor about timing of the resubmission, whether or not to put it in for that next cycle immediately or to wait a cycle or two. And we, if I think we ultimately decided to just go for the next cycle. So although it was not discussed in study section, we still do get reviews. So there are still comments to look at. So I was able to, look at those comments and made some substantial revisions to the application, which actually involved removing some mentors and adding a new mentor. So that was one of the critiques, was that I didn't have enough expertise in someone who specifically did research in HIV and aging. So I had, aging and cognitive health researchers, and I had HIV researchers, but there wasn't sufficient sort of expertise around someone who did both. So there was a decision at some point to, well, let's think about who are the best mentors for this application. And the mentors that I had to drop like weren't offended or anything. I think everyone sort of understands like it's what's the best approach for this application. So I revamped that part. I made changes based on the feedback to the research plan, and then resubmitted it. And so I went back to NIMH for the resubmission.
Excellent. Thank you for that summary, Annie, on your first submission or your second submission at that point. So then the grant got submitted to NIMH. The grant is entitled Cognitive Health, Psychosocial Factors and Behaviors Relevant to Aging Successfully with HIV. So now we're going to have Drs. Roger Fillingim, Dr. Roland Thorpe, and Dr. Allison Moore discuss this grant.
So thank you. Yes, I'll be glad to give my my initial review of the application. I was very enthusiastic about this application, so just allow me a few minutes to share with you my high enthusiasm. Older adults living with HIV, defined as those individuals 50 years or older, they make up almost half of all the individuals living with HIV in the United States. And although their life expectancy has increased, older adults living with HIV are at greater risk for multiple mental, physical, and psychosocial health burdens compared to unaffected older adults. For example, older adults living with HIV have greater risk for cognitive impairment, which can negatively impact the ability to engage in behaviors and that benefit health. And so therefore a greater uh, understanding the factors that promote healthy behaviors despite cognitive impairment is needed to address the needs of this expanding segment of the aging of populations, in particular among those individuals who live with HIV. So this is a revised application of a proposal that seeks to examine the impact of cognitive deficits on health promoting behaviors and the moderating effects of psychosocial resources on these relationships. I really like this application, and I'll just briefly share with you some of the things that help my enthusiasm high. This is an outstanding candidate who has is very strong and well qualified. For example, she has published 19 papers, of which she's the first author on 9. She's received an NRS award for her dissertation. She completed a postdoc fellowship, and now she's currently assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the Keck School of Medicine. She's also received 2 grants for pilot funding, and she has experience working on other funding projects. She also has some extremely strong letters of support. As it relates to the career development plan, I thought the career development plan was pretty well written. The training focuses on 4 areas: cognition, HIV, aging, longitudinal research, biostatistics, and professional development. The um, the the longitudinal, one thing that did diminish my enthusiasm around the plan was overall the plan I thought was well written and strong, but there was no limited information on evaluation plan, although the candidate did have some information on benchmarks for success. As it relates to the research plan, this is where I thought my enthusiasm waned a little bit, but these are minor concerns. So the aims, so she aimed to understand the impact of cognitive deficits on health promoting behaviors among adults with HIV and the moderating role of psychosocial resources. That was a strong. She was using secondary data sets from two well-defined cohort studies, and then a primary data collection and two of the RO1 studies of the mentors. And she's also going to use some qualitative interviews that we conducted in 40 older adults with HIV with and without cognitive complaints. So I thought this was very well done. But the minor concerns that I had here is that there seemed to be a lot of aims with up to 4 data sets as well as a qualitative component being utilized. While I like the data, but I just think it wasn't clear how all these pieces were going to come together to answer the question. But that's a minor concern. She has an outstanding mentorship team who have experience mentoring junior scholars and all have extramural funding, and the mentors letters seem to support their commitment to the candidates training. And finally, I think the research environment is strong and provides a platform for her to do her proposal research. And I'll stop right there.
Okay, thank you very much. That was an excellent summary by reviewer one, and I certainly agree that there were multiple strengths to this application, many of which have already been mentioned. I was somewhat less enthusiastic in my scoring, so I'm going to primarily focus on the weaknesses I saw. With the candidate, though, I agree this is an outstanding candidate, and I had no concerns at all there. And I agree that the career development plan is quite strong. A couple of minor concerns I had there was the inclusion of training in material mental health issues in adults aging with HIV would have been helpful. And this is quite a robust training plan with lots of training activities, and this may need to be cut back in order to make sure the research plan is completed. My biggest concerns came in the research plan, and while there were several strengths, the weaknesses that diminished my enthusiasm here. First of all, the scientific premise is somewhat underdeveloped here, and the candidate fails to adequately consider a significant body of literature on positive behaviors related to cognition and HIV, and so that needed a little more work. Some concerns about the hypotheses in aim one. First of all, the plan to study adherence with ARVs and that interaction with HIV status doesn't really make sense because people without HIV aren't taking these medications. So I didn't understand that. And there seemed to be a lot of overlap between hypothesis 1A and 1B. Also, in terms of handling the data from these multiple studies, it wasn't clear if the data are going to be combined across these studies or the analyses are going to be conducted independently within each study, and this can impact the number of comparisons and the data management requirements. Also, there may be important characteristics that differ across participants from these different data sets, and that hasn't really been addressed. Another concern I had was the selection process for qualitative interviews in the qualitative component, and a simple self-reported question of whether the individual experiences cognitive difficulties could be confounded with depression and may actually miss some people who do have cognitive difficulties. And then finally, more detail in the longitudinal analyses, particularly sort of mapping out all the measures onto the planned analyses and in the different data sets would have been helpful and better detailing what's going to happen there. The mentoring team, I agree, was really quite strong, although I will say the number of concerns I saw in the research plan at least made me question how involved some of the mentors were in the preparation of the application. And then the environment, I agree, is outstanding. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'm the third reviewer, and I will, thanks for the other comments. I'm just going to provide comments that haven't already been covered. I thought this application was quite responsive to the reviewer comments from the first review. And so my main comments are minor and relate first to the career development plan. Again, it's a minor comment. I thought that it was odd that she said that she set this benchmark to attend 80% of the didactic training. It was unusual to say that you'd set such a benchmark. You figure you just attend all of it. For research plan, comments are, it's much better than it was. It's better articulated than it was. Suggestions for improvement are there's no real attention given to the effects of race and ethnicity on the proposed outcomes. These should be included. And given the sample size, there are other factors that could be considered as potential moderators or for the stratified analysis. And finally, the qualitative section is still underdeveloped. Hopefully those skills will improve with training. Those are the only comments I have for this application. So,
Thank you. Annie, so then what happened? Those were the reviews. What happened next?
So it was given a score of 21, and at that point I was in contact with my program officer, who told me that it was within a funding range and that he didn't have any answers for me, but that it would go to council. And at that point, council would decide which applications to fund. So I was just in contact with my program officer until advisory council met. And ultimately what happened was his application was not funded. And the information that I got from my program officer was that a score of 21 is sort of borderline where it could go either way. And there's a lot of factors like how much money they have and what other applications are also on the borderline score. And ultimately my application just didn't quite hit the funding priorities as well as some other applications did. So it sort of came down to, it could have gone either way. And in this case, it did not go in my favor. So at that point, my program officer said that because of the focus on aging, that this is something that NIA aging might be interested in. And so he recommended that I speak to a program officer there, which I did, and is someone that I know from other interactions. And the NIA program officer told me that indeed, like content-wise, this is something that aging would be interested in, but because of the way it was reviewed, NIA could not consider it at this point. And the reason for that is because my application was an HIV application. So it went to a study section, to the HIV study section that's put together by CSR. And and NIA has their own study sections for K awards specifically. So for K awards, NIA will not take the reviews from CSR study sections, although for other mechanisms, they will take reviews from CSR study sections. So there was sort of this I don't know, like administrative sort of, thing that just didn't work out in my favor. So I was encouraged by the program officer at NIA to submit to NIA in the next submission, right? So as a new submission. So you get one resubmission. So my third submission has to be a new submission. And just to answer the question of why, I did go to NIA, but another reason for all the reasons I described, but another reason why I could not go back to mental health is because mental health, I think, may be the only institute that actually has a time limitation on K awards. You cannot apply for a K award through NIMH if you've been more than 10 years out of your doctoral program. So I had just hit that mark. So So that was like my last shot at NIMH, was that second submission, because after that I was just like a little bit out of that 10-year mark. So NIMH was out for lots of different reasons. And so for my third submission, I submitted to NIA and took the comments from the NIMH review and revised my application and submitted it to NIA.
Excellent, thank you. So then the grant, entitled Cognitive Health, Psychosocial Factors and Behaviors Relevant to Aging Successfully with HIV, gets reviewed by a study section at NIA.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Roger Fillingem from the University of Florida, and I am the primary reviewer on this application. And the overall goals of this KO1 application are to investigate the relationship between cognitive deficits and health promoting behaviors, clarifying the moderating role of positive resources, and determining the cumulative impact of these interactions on quality of life for older adults experiencing stress while living with HIV. This is clearly a topic of high public health and scientific impact, and it's proposed by a candidate with several strengths. So I'd just like to summarize some of the strengths and weaknesses I see in the application here. First of all, as I mentioned, this is a strong candidate. Dr. Nguyen is a tenure track assistant professor in family medicine and has an interest in investigating the interactions of psychological factors, cognition, and life stress on health and successful aging in people with HIV infection. She's currently conducting research in this area and has several recent publications in the field, and has expertise in theories of aging and health behavior, so a number of strengths. A couple of weaknesses on the candidate side. Some of the publications are not in very high impact factor journals, and the candidate doesn't have a long history of working in HIV research. The career development plan, I had a number of concerns about this. First, while the learning plan aimed to strengthen skills in cognition, HIV, and aging, and that's quite appropriate given the proposed project, I felt the PI didn't take sufficient advantage of existing statistical consultation and other biostatistical core services. I also thought there was a need to focus more on gaining expertise in HIV, cognition, and other comorbid conditions. So those were moderate weaknesses in my view. The research plan also had a number of weaknesses. A strength, though, is that it includes using existing data, which increases feasibility of completing the work, and also plans to collect new data. So that will help the investigator learn additional skills. On the weakness side, the prevalence of cognitive impairment among older adults with HIV is not clear. A lot of the application is based on retrospective data analysis, and if no correlation between cognitive impairment and HIV exists, then aims 1 and 2 are not going to be successful. Reconsenting patients is going to be necessary, and that could be a significant limitation on the study, as many of those patients may no longer fit study criteria. Natural aging speed differs across different race groups and genders, and it's not clear how that's going to be considered in the analyses. Several variables were not discussed, including the type of antiviral drug taken, its mode of action, the duration and type of exercise, and also I thought that more strict inclusion and exclusion criteria should be used to reduce variability and increase homogeneity in the sample. The mentoring team I thought was quite strong. The primary mentor, Dr. Hahn, is an associate professor in the department and is well established and productive. And also the PI and primary mentor have published together, which is another strength. One minor weakness is that the candidate has not published with any of the other members of the mentoring team, but that was not a major concern. And then finally, I thought the environment at Keck School of Medicine was quite strong. And so I'll stop there and hear from my colleagues.
Thank you. I'm Allison Moore from the University of California, San Diego, and second reviewer for this application. I echo many of the sentiments from Dr. Villingen, and to add additional comments, I would like only to say that candidate is strong, significance is high, innovation is reasonable, and approach is strong in terms of use of mixed methods. A few weaknesses, however, were main concerns with this application for me. The AIM-3 involves collecting data from 40 participants, and this could be a great opportunity to collect some quantitative data, particularly some neurocognitive, neuropsychological functioning data, which could complement the data found in the secondary data analysis being used for some of the other aspects of this proposal. And also be helpful to discuss some of the psychometric indices of the measures being used in the proposal, their appropriateness and the validity of them. And then it's questionable whether the meaningfulness of the power analysis for the secondary data evaluation. And also one should discuss issues related to data saturation and sample size for the qualitative analysis. That's all I have. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Roland Thorpe from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and I'm the third reviewer. Thank you for the first two reviewers for your outstanding and detailed review. I only have a couple things to, and I totally agree with all the strengths and weaknesses that have been said. I just want to add a couple more things that diminish my enthusiasm with regard to the research plan. One of the things is that I didn't see a plan for what to do if the findings from the two data sets produce conflicting results. And while I appreciate that the candidate was going to receive training in longitudinal data analysis, the statistical analysis plan in the application as written seems more for cross-sectional data. And I think it would have been strengthened if they would have at least talked about changes in covariance over time. That wasn't considered. And also, one other question I raise is that how will variables such as cognitive decline and maintenance of positive resources over time be operationalized? And that's those are my only other points that I had to include. Thank you.
Thank you. So another set of reviews. Annie, what happened?
So this application got a score of 47, and as a scientist, like for me, that experience taught me that I can submit basically a similar application to different study sections, and the scores varied by quite a lot. But I think when I went to NIMH, right, the study section was the HIV study section, so that the reviewers are all HIV researchers. Going to NIA, it's the NIA study section, and reviewers are all aging researchers. Not to say that there is an overlap in sort of expertise, but I think people just bring different perspectives into the review. And so for me, this was sort of an example of this. And by now I'm very used to revising my application. So I went about revising it and just taking into account all the different critiques, working with my mentors. Really, my primary mentor was very involved in every step of the way. And I think everyone might have a different experience, I'm not sure, but for me, that was really important have a mentor, a primary mentor who actually was a primary mentor, and was really involved. He was like, we went line by line, and addressed, like, okay, how do we address this comment? How do we address that? And even worked with like wording, on the revision and how to deal with that. The one thing that I did do a little bit differently this time was, because a number of comments kept coming up about the professional development piece, I went to our CTSI, and our CTSI has an arm that works with scholars who want to put in some sort of career development award to specifically work on the career development piece, not the research piece, but the career development piece. So I got, and this is like my 4th submission now, but I actually got some new insights into how to write that piece more effectively, even down to sort of the formatting of it and how to visually put it together. So there were some good tips that I got there that I incorporated into this 4th submission, the resubmission to NIA. So I thought that was really helpful, looking for these extra resources. And then the other thing here is I was in contact with my program officer, because it did get a score, even though 47 is not really within funding range, but it did get a score. So I was in contact with my program officer, who had me like write a 1-page response to the critiques, just so he would have it in case the opportunity came up to get it funded. And he told me it was a long shot, like, don't count on it, just think about the resubmission. But at least for me, I was grateful to have that sort of communication with my program officer at this point. So I felt better. I felt good, I guess, going into the resubmission.
Excellent. Thank you. So then the grant, entitled Cognitive Health, Psychosocial Factors and Behaviors Relevant to Aging Successfully with HIV, gets resubmitted and reviewed by a study section at NIA.
All right, thank you. I'm the first reviewer. So this is a resubmission application, and it is deemed as moderately responsive to the prior review. Applicant remains strong. I'm going to actually, in this case, give a bit of a review of the introduction to the application. So she has a 1-page introduction to her application, which is typical for revisions. She provides basically a very brief nod to the positive responses to her prior application, and then spends the rest of the page focused on the critiques from her prior application. And the main critiques she outlines in response to are the mentoring meeting frequency details and more coursework needed. And she talks about adding more details in those domains and increasing the frequency of meetings with her mentors, and revising the mentoring plan and the coursework plan, and making it more clear, as she just described to the rest of the group. She acknowledges that cognition is a new area for her with limited publications in the area, and identifies this as a focus of this application. She wants to learn more about the topic. That's why she's focused on it in this career training award. And then for research plan, she talks about the plan, including the plan in response to the critique that the plan did not include controlling for ADL, mobility, and comorbidities. And she responds that these will be included in the analyses, and describes them briefly, what they are and what the data sets do include them. And the comment about qualitative data collection being challenging due to cognitive status. She talks about exclusion criteria to screen out people who will have significant cognitive impairment and may not be able to participate. She talks about those, and ensuring participants will be able to participate with adequate cognitive status. Social support measures not being able to measure quality of support. Talks about the inherent limitations for some of the measures available in the data sets. that she is using, but talks about the attributes that they do have as well. And then strategies to distinguish normal aging versus HIV-related cognitive difficulties needed. She talks about how she addresses that. And finally, cognitive deficits can be broad, specific areas of interest should be discussed. She addresses that concern as well in her covered one pager. And then as typical in these applications, she puts a line on the side that indicates to the reviewer where substantive changes have been made. And then her application, hasn't been hugely changed, just somewhat changed in review in response to the reviewer comments. Now I'm going to move on to the review part of it. And then for reviewer one, I'm going to state that she has made revisions in response to the review, and she is a strong candidate. She has a strong team of mentors, institutional commitments, excellence, as well as the environment. The enthusiasm for the application was tempered by it not being completely clear who's going to be providing guidance to Dr. Wen as it relates to mixed methods research. The analytic approach fails to include any description of the longitudinal analysis approaches, and the study is powered on a cross-section study design, and the functional form of the regression to be modeled is omitted. Those are the main critiques. Again, candidate's outstanding. However, it was observed that her biosketch needed updating. Career development plan was noted to be well written, addressing many of the prior critiques, and details regarding the mentoring plan are included, and how the coursework links to the aims, includes a well-balanced mix of coursework, experiential, and mentored training. Weaknesses still remain, though, in that it is unclear in the training plan or in the candidate's biosketch how much experience she has in qualitative methods. Research plan, there's look good to me. Didn't see any weaknesses at all this time around. From my perspective, and then for mentors, the only critique I'd have is that someone with experience in mixed methods would strengthen the application. I have no other comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you, reviewer number one, for the outstanding review. I just have, I first want to say, from my perspective, I thought the candidate did an outstanding job with the revisions, and that I have one, I totally agree with all the things that the reviewer number one has said. I just have one minor thing, and I want to stress that it's a minor comment, is as it relates to the candidate. Within the candidates, the candidate lacks consideration for the necessary time required with their primary and co-mentors to be successful in the application. I think that the time that's stated is really the candidate underappreciates how much time is going to be needed to meet with their primary and co-mentors to be successful with this project. But I think that can certainly be worked out, and I don't think that impacts my high level enthusiasm that I have for this revised application. That's all that I have to add.
Okay, I thank my colleagues for those thorough reviews, and I agree wholeheartedly. I thought this was an outstanding application, a number of strengths for the candidate. This candidate participated in the STAR program, and this is produced 2 papers that are in preparation right now, a number of additional trainings, successfully obtaining an exploratory grant. And so it's really a highly prepared and productive early stage candidate. The only minor concern I had in terms of the candidate is that cognition is a new area. However, at some level, that's what a K award is for, is to help somebody devote considerable time to career development in needed areas. So I didn't think that was a significant concern. I agree, the career development plan is quite strong, well-specified objectives, a nice combination of learning activities. You know, this isn't really score driving, but I would quibble a bit on the meetings that are proposed to attend. I would emphasize GSA more than the American Public Health Association meeting. The research plan was outstanding as well. Exclusion criteria are very clear. A plan to examine specific areas of cognitive deficits is included. The qualitative component is quite strong. And so I really think the research plan in this resubmission has been expertly crafted, and the mentoring team, I agree, is outstanding as well, as is the environment. And so I really have no other weaknesses to bring up. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So Annie, you got another set of reviews.
Yeah, and this one was this was scored a 22. So, which is a big improvement from the 47, but I was sort of like, okay, so I was scored a 21 and it wasn't funded. Now it's a 22. I'm sort of back in that borderline kind of funding range, right? So it's like, yay, but also, eh. So I think that's just how it goes sometimes, right? And so with this score, I was in contact with my program officer almost right away. And I know every program officer is different, but this one, mine was really helpful. And he he had me write the sort of a page of response to the critiques that he could have going into advisory council. And he was so helpful to the point of even, like even giving me suggestions on how to respond to some, you know, like how to write it. So he was just very involved and very, very helpful in this process. So it went to council and got funded. So
Yay!
yeah, so this application was ultimately funded. I submitted the first application January of 2018, and funding for this started April of 2020. So it was a 2-year process in total from first submission to funding. So it was an exercise in endurance and just like learning how to revise and how to respond to different critiques. And every set of reviewers just has a different perspective. You know, they'll look at different things and sort of pick up on different aspects of the application. So I think for me, it was just all about like trying until I succeeded.
Thank you, Annie. What would be your words of wisdom that you would want to share with other Rickmar scientists about your journey?
Don't give up. Like definitely don't give up, and take advantage of all the resources that are out there. Like, you know, like I mentioned, I went to CTSI to look at my career development piece after the third submission, right? I could have gone earlier, but for whatever reason, I just didn't. But you know, just things like that. I think trying to get a hold of those resources as soon as possible. Being in contact with the program officer is really helpful. I think if for no other reason, it's sort of a barometer of how enthusiastic they are for the application and whether or not, you know, I don't know, it just, for me, my experience with the different program officers was that just being in contact with them and knowing what they had to say about the application was helpful for me. And then also having a primary mentor who actually is dedicated and involved with the whole process, you know, really like doing track changes, right? Like on the application itself, like that level of involvement, I think is really helpful. But yeah, and then getting past the disappointment of, particularly not just like for me, like the different resubmissions, but like the not discussed, I think was the most disappointing to me, because it feels like, oh, I put in all this effort into writing this thing and they didn't even talk about it. but they, I mean, reviewers did review it. They just didn't talk about it in study section, right? So, but there's a psychological piece of that where it just feels more disappointing somehow. And then celebrating the highs, celebrating, like, even getting a score is a good thing. So like even a 47 needs to be celebrated because it was scored, and then celebrating the actual, you know, getting the notice of award. Lots of celebrations there.
Thank you. So with our faculty, you are all dedicated Rickmar faculty. Any words of wisdom that you have for our Rickmar scientists on the resubmission processes? We'll start with Allison.
I echo what Annie says, having the go-gettemness, the resilience, having a great mentor or mentors is really key to this process, as well as being a great writer. She's a great writer, and having the right background to do it, having really important.
Roland?
Yeah, the advice I would give is listen to your mentors. Listen to your mentors. That's the single piece, and understand that separate yourself from the work, because you're right. It becomes psychological if your work doesn't get discussed, because there's a lot of time and energy that was poured into that application. But recognize that there's a separation between you and your work, and then take some time off and be willing to jump back into the summary statements with your team of mentors to get a plan of action to resubmit.
Thank you. Roger?
Yeah, and sort of piggybacking on what Roland said, and Annie brought this up, is you sort of read the summary statements and have the shock experience, and then you sort of have to come back to it. And, you know, every now and then a reviewer might say something helpful, right? So be willing to be open to those kinds of critiques. And then even when reviewers are wrong, by and large, they're right. Because this is the review process is not only meant to identify the best science to invest public dollars in, it's also a hurdle you have to get over to get funded, right? And so you have to adopt a strategic approach to be able to do the work you want to do. And I think Annie also experienced some of the capriciousness of the process at times, that an application that scored a 22 at one study section, almost identical application goes to another study section and the score is twice as high. And you know, there are different perspectives. I could review a grant tomorrow that's already had a perfect score in another study section, and I could score it a 5, right? And so just understanding that this process exists for a reason. It's not perfect, but it appears to be the best we have so far. And it's in no way personal. And I think that helps in sort of reapproaching the effort and sticking with it.
Well, thank you everybody for joining this session today. I hope it was useful to see one scientist's experience of going through an application and resubmission process. And we welcome everybody to take advantage of the different resources available to you at your Rickmar sites and at the Rickmar Coordinating Center. Thank you.